Hello everyone, New Games here with another video in the tutorial series of recreating the core version of Getaway Shootout. In the last video, we implemented our first UI with the scoreboard up top here. It currently doesn't have great font like the original game, but it works like the original that has a player score, and each player's score increases as the players finish the level. In this video, we'll be continuing with the UI and implement a health UI for each player. And like the original Getaway Shootout game, when a player takes damage, so if I shoot the player, a health outline will appear on that screen and get more opaque as the player takes on more damage. So we'll be implementing that in this video today, and it should be a pretty similar process to the previous video. But there is one difference that will be different in this video, and that is the actual canvas that we'll be using. So in the last video, we created this big canvas here, and this canvas stretches the whole entire screen. But with this health UI, we want it to be only for each player, so just associated to each player's camera. And that can actually be done by a canvas that is associated with the screen space camera. So right now this is screen space overlay, but if we change it to screen space camera, it will only be set to one camera. And actually, this is actually already being done. So if I jump to our cameras that we've created, and this is done by the camera manager, a script that I'd done before the series started, we have two cameras here, and each one actually has their own canvas. And the reason why we already have this canvas here is because I created a script to just generate these border lines. So each camera has a borderline on the edge that just displays a border between two camera screens. So we'll utilize these canvases that have been already created to create this health effect that is just going to be on the border of each camera. So let's go ahead and do that. The first thing I'll do is to navigate to that game camera. And that is just simply in our prefabs camera folder. And I'll open up this camera prefab. So as I was saying before, there is a canvas under this game camera, and that is associated to each player. And it just defaults with some border lines separating the cameras. So this is the canvas that we want to actually create this health UI effect. So I'm just going to create a new image in this canvas, and I want it to stretch the whole entire screen because I want it to be a border effect on the whole screen. So I'm going to hold Shift and Alt and click the full scale mode. And the other thing I'll change is the image's sprite. So before this video, I imported a health glow effect, and this is just basically an opacity border along the edge there. So I'm going to click that and select it, and nicely already it selected sliced as the image type. That way it scales nicely to the border instead of just being stretched out with the simple mode. And then the next thing I'll do to get it more like the original game is just change the color of this image, and I'll change it to something red for kind of a blood effect. And that's pretty much it for just creating this UI element. But now going to the functionality, what we want is to just change the opacity of this depending on the player's health. So when the player has full health, it'll be opacity of 0. And then when the player is max damage, we'll have it fully opaque, and then just lerp between the two values depending on how much health it has. So I'll initially set it to a value of 0, corresponding to full health, and then I'll save this. So let's go forward and actually implement that functionality of changing the opacity. To do this, I'm going to create a script. So I'm going to navigate to our UI scripts folder and create a UI script that controls this opacity for the health. And I'll just do mono behavior, and I'll call it health UI and open up in our scene here. And actually, before I do that, I'll just make the script that I just created and add it to this image, or not the health component, the health UI script, and just add it to this image. So then we're all set to go there. Okay, so this health UI is going to be a pretty simple script because all it is doing is setting the opacity of an image corresponding to the player's health. So we'll actually do very similar things to the previous video. The first thing that we'll do is to create some sort of initialization function where we can actually get the health component that we are subscribing to, or to measure the actual current health. So I'll do something like public void init, and C# actually just completed that. We don't want that. So I'll name it init like this, and we just want to pass in the health that we're tracking. So health, and I'll just call it health like that. And so this is going to be the health that we're tracking, and I'll create a reference to this. So I'll do something like health, and I'll just do this.health equals health to now just store that component in our script. Now the next thing we want to do is to actually create a function to change the opacity of this image that we're on. So I'll do something like void update, or I'll do something actually before I do that. I'll do something like void on health changed, and we'll get in the value of the current health. So I haven't linked this up yet, but I'm just going to implement this method here. And so we're inputting the current health of this health component. The other thing that we'll need to know is just the max health. So if I do health dot max health, let me just check if pretty sure that's the field that I set. Yeah, so we have max health just being set to default of 100, but that's just the health that is initially initialized to the current health at the start. Okay, so max health is the value that we want to have for the upper bound, and then basically we just want to have this current health lerp between this max health and the 0 health. So we can do something like this. We can do float opacity, and we're using this math.lerp. And lerp, all it does is to take a number, something like current health, and to basically put it in between the two bounds of two other floats, and distribute it just as like a linear linear progression between those two numbers. And actually I kind of got that mixed up. So float A is the lower bound, float B is the upper bound, and then T is actually going to be the value of the current health. Actually, now that I'm looking at this, that's not how it actually works, because float T is just a value between 0 and 1. So actually, lerp is not going to be what we want. Something like this actually would be more suited. Something like current health divided by health.max health. And yeah, this is actually much simpler. So this is just saying our current health divided by max health should be a value between 0 and 1, assuming that current health never goes above 1. But we could just clamp it just to make sure. So if I do something like clamp, and there's a nice function called clamp 0, 1, which just makes sure the value is between 0 and 1. Okay, so that's going to be the function that I use to actually get the opacity. And once we get the opacity, all we have to do is to just get the image component. And this is going to be the image under the UI library here. And we get our own image and then just set the color to be equal to, well, ideally we do something like color.alpha and set the alpha this way. But in Unity, when you change a color, you have to actually change the whole class or the whole, maybe it's a structure or struct. But anyways, you have to change the whole class. So you have to do something like new color, and I'll have to do something like this. To get the R, G, and B values. And then what we want is just to change the alpha value, which is the opacity, and that's the opacity value that we calculated. Okay, so we have this function here that when health changes, calculates the opacity, and then changes the image color to have all the same components except the opacity. So that seems like enough functionality to actually do what we want. One other thing, like the original game, we could have something like void update, and we could do some sort of heartbeat animation that just nicely kind of changes the alpha to basically have like almost like a heartbeat effect. And we could do that in the update, but one thing to note is it might be conflicting with this opacity value. So it could be better to actually do something like setting the opacity in the update right here, and then also do like the heartbeat animation in the update. But I won't get into the actual animation, since all we really need to do is to actually just display the opacity as a constant color, just to have it visually in our game. And the animation is just extra. So we'll just do that for now. And let's see, the next thing to do is actually link up this method here. And I believe, so if I do something like this dot health, we have two events here, on damage and on death. But if I go to our health script here, on damage is getting called correctly on damage, but that's the only place that we're calling it. And for something like health UI, we really want to know not only damage, but when we increase the health, so we increase the health here. We also set max health here. So there's multiple places where health is being changed. So we should notify in those spots as well. So one thing we could do is to actually create another event and call this on health changed, and just simply pass it in the current health, which is a float. And we could call this method every time we change the current health. So here, here, here on damage. Probably not on the start since that's just the default health. But as I was kind of looking at ways to do this before I started this video, one possible better alternative to actually just manually implementing this event call is to actually have a C# property that handles this notification that this property has changed. So that way we don't have to do it manually. And let me actually implement what I'm talking about to make it make more sense. So this is actually a C# feature. It's called properties. And basically it's doing something very similar to something called like getter and setter methods. So if I did like something like float get health, and then I return the current health, this would be a getter method that I would associate to this variable here, current health. And then I could also do another method to actually set the health and call it set health. But C# has something called properties that kind of almost generate that code for you. And with that, you can also kind of set your own code to actually do things like call events and so forth. And that's what we'll be doing to actually notify a change. So I'm going to call this property health. And the way to define the property is then to actually have something called the get, which will be what value we get for the health. And this is actually just going to be the current health. And then we'll have the set. So this is actually setting this health property. And we'll have it, well, by default, we'll have something like current health equals, and then value is the value that's being passed into this health property. But we'll change this up just a little bit because we want to actually call this on health change. So I'll do something like if current health does not equal value, that means we're changing this value, and we'll call this on health change. And actually, I'll just only change the value here when we do that. And I'll do it before. Okay, so one thing I'm going to do is actually make this health property a float, because the health is a float. And so there's another error that it's giving me, and that's actually because I named this property the same thing as the class. So I'm actually going to name this to something like cur health. And one common convention with kind of these properties and then this private variable is to do something like an underscore current health for the private variable. And that way we just don't change the current health directly. It helps us know that we're using this property instead. So that's what I'll do, something like that, and change those values there. Okay, so at this point, all we've done is to now create this property, which now has a get method, which is just returning the current health, and then also a set method, but importantly, it's calling this on health change. And we'll now use this current health property in the rest of our script. So I'll start down here actually with damage. So when we take damage, we'll do something like current health minus equal damage, and then something like this, and just replace kind of all the references to this current health. And in a case like this, we could be a little more efficient. So we're setting current health kind of twice here. Basically, if it's over the maximum amount of health, we just make sure it's below by setting a cap. Perhaps we could do something like current health equals something like this, just in one line. And actually, so, oh, okay, this is actually a Boolean variable that's being passed in. So we could actually do something like this. Using, I forget what it's exactly called, but using this Boolean as a condition. So if we're capping health, then do this math.min method. Otherwise, use just the default increase by the amount. Okay, then I'll remove the rest of that. I think that's like the ternary operator, I think is what it's called. But anyways, we've replaced all the references to that private variable current health and replaced it with this property now that notifies people that are listening to the on health change. The other thing on the start method, I left this one because we probably don't want to notify when we're just initializing the health at the beginning. So I'll just do something like current health equals max health on start. And actually, perhaps maybe we'll do something like on awake for that. Okay, so I'll save this script. And now we should actually be able to reference this health. So on health change should now be called every time the health variable changes, not just on damage. And we can subscribe to it with our event here, or our function there. Okay, and then I'll just do something like on destroy to unsubscribe, and that should wrap up this script. Okay, now with the script saved, I'm going to make sure I add it to this image here, which is just a health UI. Actually, I already did. I added it to this component here. And the next thing to do is actually to link this health UI component to each player that it's listening to. So there'll be a game camera for each player, and this is actually done, or we can actually link it in the game manager. So I'm going to jump back to our scripts and go to game manager. So we have a method down here called create cameras, and again, that canvas component is under each camera. So if I jump to this function, we have this create cameras, use this camera manager, which is a script that I wrote to generate each camera. But importantly, I want to know if there's a way to get each camera. If I made a function that calls that. So if I do something, I go to the camera manager. Okay, so there's no way of getting the current camera of a player, so I'm just going to create a method to get that. Public, and I'll just do camera. And then just do something like that with all of it auto-filled like that. So this way, I just need a way to actually get the current camera of each player. So if I do something like this, looping through the number of players. Actually, number of human players, because only human players have cameras. And basically I want to, I just realized, okay, so with this function here, we get a reference to the cameras. So I actually don't need that method. I'll just remove that there then. Because we have the reference to cameras right there. Okay. So I'll loop through these cameras, and basically all we want to do is to get a reference to that health UI. And the way we can do that, we could do something like this. Get component and children, health UI. And then all we need to do is just initialize, and we initialize it with the corresponding player's health. So we need to pass in the player's health, and we have stored up top just an array of players here, so we could get current player, the ith player, and then we just need to get the component of health. So if I do something like health equals the ith player, and then just get component of health, since this health component lives on the same game object as this player component. So that should work out fine. And just pass in that as for the initialization. Now, again, I'm going to mention this because this can get a little messy if we're initializing a lot of different UI components. So we could create a whole separate script to be some sort of UI manager that basically just doesn't make the game manager do all this initialization. But I'm just going to keep it like that for now and click save. And now when we play the game, we should hopefully have everything lined up to actually see health damage being taken. So if I shoot player 1, there was no damage there. That could be for multiple reasons. I'm going to grab something for a lighter gun to hopefully get lighter damage. Actually, we already do see some sort of damage. That doesn't seem to be corresponding correctly because this player just spawned and they already have damage. If I go to the health UI, and just go to debug mode. So it's correctly associated with that player's health, but that player shouldn't have any damage right now. Oh, actually, I think I know what I'm doing wrong. Oops. Or there might be multiple things, but the first thing is if I jump to the health UI, I believe, so when we are on max health, so when current health equals max health, this would be a value of 1. So opacity would be a value of 1. And we actually want the opposite of that. When we're at full health, we want an opacity of 0. So one way to switch this is just to do 1 minus. And that way we should be able to switch it. Okay, now let's check. So if I take a weapon here and damage the player slightly, okay, you can see it increase opacity. Now if I kill the player, okay, it seemed to be working with full opacity. Let's try the other player. The other player needs a weapon though. Can't use the teleport gun. Okay, pistol. Shoot once. Shoot twice. Well, that is weird. So, not related to this UI interface right now. I shot the other player with only 2 pistol shots. I think in the original game it's 3, so I'll double check at the end of the video. Maybe I implemented something wrong with the pistol weapon, maybe too much damage. But anyways, this health UI seems to be working correctly. Okay, so just some final things now to mention. One thing you could do is to actually implement an animation, as I was mentioning before, to do some sort of like heartbeat animation, just to make it look a little more dynamic. But yeah, that's about it. You could also possibly refactor this into maybe a class above it, perhaps player UI, and then initialize from there instead of just directly initializing the health UI. But for right now, I think this is a great solution. We basically just have a health UI component listening to the player's health changes and basically just updating that image to be the correct opacity. So that's where I'm going to end off the video today. I think in the next video, we'll do another UI implementation, and then perhaps then that'll be kind of the end of the UI, and the rest you can just do on your own if you're interested in making it more like the original game. All right, thank you.